there was one anecdote that really stood out to me as rather important and quite memorable because it went by the nickname Whoops. I think many of you in the audience may be familiar with this. When the Washington Public Power Supply System in the 1970s attempted to build multiple kinds of reactors at once in a giant project, and that ultimately by the 1980s led to the largest municipal bond default in American history, and has sort of been held up to me early on when I was learning about this industry and what went wrong and got us to where we are today as this example of how too much ambition, too scattershot of a focus on what you wanted to build, and an inability to commit to certain designs and technologies was disastrous at that period in the industry's history. And if you look now at the constellation of brands that is up there, pun intended, you will see that there's a lot of players in this space right now. And I think we have three of the most interesting and distinct ones here. I mean, Westinghouse needs no introduction. Kairos Power just managed to get the first Gen 4, the first PPA with a utility in the US for a Gen 4 reactor. And Nano, I'm proud to say, is native to this very city and is charging ahead with two projects as we speak. But I'm eager to kind of dissect how we get from here to actually having reactors pumping electrons onto the grid, and how many of these players can survive and what different kinds of roles they can play in this future ecosystem, and what kinds of supply chains need to be established to support that. So I'm going to start with John. I'd love you to just give a little bit of an introduction, and I will go to your first slide.
No, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's great to see all the enthusiasm and interest in the industry. It's busy, exciting time, so really happy to be here. Myself, so I head up what we call new market development for the Americas for Energy Systems Group within Westinghouse, which is essentially our new build group, which quite honestly was it was very busy internationally, several years ago, and 12 months ago, the U.S. really just came to life in such a big way. So we're right in the middle of all that, and give you an update on some things. If you just real quick on where Westinghouse is today, I know many of you know Westinghouse, the history, 70 years nuclear experience in business, for 139 years total. Where we are today, we're 11,000 plus. We're hiring like crazy. We probably brought on 1,500 people in the past 12 months. So if you know any young, old, experienced, whatever the case may be, personnel, please send them our way. Engineering, manufacturing, business development, across the board, we're hiring, and internationally as well. So, global footprint, of course, different manufacturing facilities. 50% of the world's fleet does use our technology, and the Gen 3 Plus, we'll talk more about this on the AP1000, but we've got 6 units operating worldwide, 2 in Georgia, of course, 4 in China, 14 more in construction in China, and 6 more plants in early contracts in Europe, and the US is really picking it up here lately, and I'll talk more about some of the initiatives there. The way we're set up as a business, you can see the bottom row, it's the new build group, as I mentioned. We have the eVinci micro reactor as well, which is, very, very different, very new technology. This is a 5 megawatt nuclear battery, think of it that way. So really different market segments, military bases, universities, remote communities. And, we manufacture fuel as well. So we've got 3 facilities around the world, 1 in the US, 1 in the UK, 1 in Sweden. So we have a very robust supply chain for that, and then long-term operations and outage management to round out the services part of the business. If you go to the next chart. A few more details. So this is the new build portfolio. The AP1000 is our workhorse. It's proven, ready to go. Licensed in several countries. I mentioned the units that are under construction and operating, and we're very proud of the performance of those units, operating very well in the field. The one thing I'll add too is we're also are bringing a consortium together here in the U.S., what we call the 10 pack, right? And this is really in response to the various executive orders coming out of the Trump administration. And the idea here is to get 10 AP1000, units operating, or excuse me, starting construction by the end of the decade and operating several years after. So that is really, really starting to take shape. And I think to some of the earlier comments below, the ability to bring utilities together, off-takers together, constructors together was a key part of that. So a lot more to come on that, but that is real, that is moving, and there's some really new innovative business models surrounding that. AP300, this is our SMR, which is derived from the AP1000. So this is in design phase, but we wanted to change as little as we could versus the AP1000, hit the cost drivers and get this to market. And so that is in design. And our target here is to get our first unit up and running, in the 2034, 2035 timeframe. Then the Avinci I mentioned, that is in design as well. Our target there is to get our first unit up and running by the end of this decade. And then long duration storage, I know we're not here to talk about storage, but this is something that we also offer. That initially was started as a way to couple with nuclear and have storage coupled with nuclear. Now this is a standalone product, but that's the ultimate vision, is to bring those two technologies back together. So that's where we are as a company, and happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, Jeffrey.
Great. Excuse me. Good morning, everyone. Jeff Olson. I lead commercial for Kairos Power. At Kairos Power, we're developing a 150 megawatt commercial reactor. It's a module-based reactor. So we have customers looking at siting and generation capacity larger than that, but it's a modular-based system starting at 150 megawatt commercial. Wonderful to be here this morning. Last year, I had the opportunity to be here, sitting where you all are, and watch the conference from the seats. And if I knew what we all would accomplish over the year in front of us, it probably would have been difficult to sleep that night, just given everything that we had in our plates. Also this year, I had the opportunity to have my wonderful wife and 6.5-year-old daughter here with me. So it's doing what I can do to bring in the next generation into this discussion. So great environment for this here right now. Thank you. With regard to Kairos, there are a few important things to understand. Our reactor capacity and the commercial and technology and licensing progress we're making is important. But it's really important to understand, how do we get from design to deployment, if we think of the theme of the panel here. And there are a few critical approaches that we're taking and we're pursuing with discipline. And that is a commitment to iterative development. So what you see on the screen right now are the iterations that take us from a series of engineering test units, ETUs, as you can see them. Those are non-nuclear, increasingly prototypic systems that are at reactor scale, which will carry us into our Hermes series, represented by our Hermes 1, Hermes, but it's our first Hermes. We call the next one Hermes 2. Our Hermes non-grid-tied reactor, and then into our Hermes 2 grid-tied reactor. We've received construction permits for the NRC for both of those Hermes systems. And the second of the two, Hermes 2, ties to the recent announcement that we had with Google and TVA for the PPA for that reactor. Over the past year, I'll just give a brief summary of some of the things that we've been up to. We have, as part of this process, we have a commitment also to vertical integration. So the team has been actively building these systems, which I'll show you in 1 minute on the next slide. And we've installed 2 reactor scale vessels, which round out the final 2 engineering test units. We broke ground for our Hermes reactor, and that was the first nuclear grade construction poured under the NRC construction permit. And we've also advanced our modular builds, precast concrete with our partners at Oak Ridge and Bernard Construction, and recently announced our fuel fabrication partnership with BWXT. For a company that's 10 years old, those have been massive accomplishments and large benefits from the iterative process that we're committed to, along with the vertical integration investments that we're making. This is what that looks like. So ET1 is a system that we designed, operate, built, and fully decommissioned. That room was then swept empty. And where you see ETU2, that's what we're building up now. That's a modular-based build. First was stick build. Now we can demonstrate our ability to deliver modularly. Those are both in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then we moved to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where you see ETU3, our final engineering test unit, side by side with our first reactor, which is our Hermes demonstration unit. So these are the projects in process right now. And on the final slide, you see a rendering for what the site in Oak Ridge will look like. So it's been a tremendous amount of work and accomplishment by the team over the past year, and look forward to speaking more about it. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Florent.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Very happy to represent Nano. Like mentioned, the headquarters are based in New York City on Times Square. I've been with Nano for less than a year. My background is working on everything that's advanced reactors, so all the technologies. On light water reactor, sorry, Westinghouse, I don't know much. But you know, I thought the sequence of the presentation is great because we went from bigger to medium size to smaller size. So you know, let's go to the next slide to just introduce Nano, who's probably the youngest you know, company on the panel today. So like I mentioned, our headquarters, corporate headquarters are in New York City. We are actively developing our engineering and manufacturing headquarters in Oak Brook, Illinois. So it's 30 minutes away from Chicago. And it ties up very well with one of the construction projects we have with the University of Illinois. So that's the reason for deploying there. And we also have presence in Oak Ridge, like many startup company, clearly like Kairos, as it's a very prone to nuclear state and place. So the vision of Nano is really looking at micro reactors. So it's technically 100 megawatt thermal or less, and it shifts a bit, you know, the challenge and the opportunities versus larger build. So you know, on the next slide, this is an overview of what Nano technology panel is. So on the left-hand side, we are very much a reactor company. The main product we're developing is Kronos. It's a 45 megawatt thermal reactor. It's a HTGR, high temperature gas cooled reactor. So this is one of the Gen 4 type of reactor. And we also have smaller variation of it, Loki and Zeus. Loki is more for space deployment or 1 megawatt level, and Zeus is smaller. Why we have three technologies is because the key underlying technologies are the same. So when we advance the technology for one, it benefits the other two because they share the same component or the same type of materials. But acknowledging also, and the last one was Odin that you might have seen in the news last week, have been sold to a UK company. So it was a good thing for us to focus our portfolio and also to get other companies in the UK. We really believe in Odin to continue the development of it. So we really hope to see a successful story with Odin in the UK, but it's not going to be under our direction. So the company is also acknowledging that with the resurgence of interest in nuclear energy and anticipating many builds in the next decade or couple decade, there's going to be supply chain issues and challenges. And this is why Nano has been focusing also on trying to develop solutions and be proactive in the supply chain space. In particular, in uranium mining, you know, conversion, deconversion, and enrichment, as well as transportation. You know, understanding that transport of nuclear material and fuel is a bit different than our assemblies or fuel type is different than what's currently being used in operating reactors. So this also, the solution that exists today may not be perfectly tailored to the solution we'll need tomorrow. So the next slide and the last slide is really just high-level tech. That's not specific to Nano. It's just, you know, to open up the discussion on, you know, ongoing or soon-to-be supply chain challenges. So it's not really talking, I think, Westinghouse or large build may have different challenges, really from the perspective of SMR, small and modular reactor, and MMR, micro modular reactors. So first on the fuel, currently we have adequate production capabilities across the world in the US for fuel. If we see the increase of nuclear power that everybody's predicting, we'll need a lot more fuel manufacturing capabilities. So it's not just mining uranium, that's also the enrichment, and also making the fuel form. A lot of those advanced reactors, Kairos, ourselves, and others are using TRISO-based fuel, which, commercial scale capabilities are not currently available. There are plans, etc. We can discuss about it, but this is acknowledging that the more it grows, we need to keep that up with the deployment. It's also, you need to understand that fuel is not just making the fuel, it needs to be qualified. And the qualification of the fuel typically goes through irradiating it in existing reactor. You cannot fast track that. This is time dependent, so this is also something we are well aware of. Now going more on the manufacturing part of things, on component manufacturing, when you talk SMR and MMR, you need to appreciate that the manufacturing is different. So I just picked up two pictures there on the, the one with a big white vessel. I think it's a vessel, pressure vessel for light water reactor in South Korea. It gives you the scale. On the left-hand side, this is where the entire reactor system for Zeus will be contained. So one is just a vessel for just the pressure vessel. The other one is the entire system. It gives you an idea of the scale difference. So when you look at manufacturing, for instance, vessels, one of the largest components, it's not the same factory that will be able to make it. Good thing is smaller vessel, you may find more fabricators who can make them, but they need to be, so we call N-stamp, nuclear certified. Now the drawback is you need a lot more of them to produce the same power. So you're really shifting, maybe more entities can do it, but you still need a larger volume. And the same applies to most of the components, but also acknowledging that there are a category of component that you need one of each for each reactor. An example will be a startup neutron source. Californium-252, you need one source per reactor. There are not so many available in the world. So as a community, we need to be well aware of that, because building a couple reactors for us, 10 reactors, we have no concern with the supply chain. Now, if we start talking building 10 reactors a year, the supply chain is going to become limiting. The last item I wanted to touch on is the workforce. That's going to be a major challenge as well. So when you do a weld, it's not the same as a nuclear weld. So the certification have to be different. We haven't built in this country a lot of nuclear reactors. So with a lot more build ahead of us, we anticipate a shortage of workforce and labor if we're not proactive in developing that. So with that, thank you.
Great, thank you. So if you'll forgive me, I'd like to start with maybe a question that the framing of it maybe is a little bit controversial given the general assumptions that I think exist in the industry right now. But I'm curious to understand from each of your perspectives, when this concept of smallness of a small modular reactor really kind of came into vogue. Why, in your view, was this not pursued as a strategy in the 60s or 70s when, we were building many different kinds of reactors? And, when did the kind of size that each of you is pursuing with your SMRs or MMRs sort of crystallize as the right one? And I ask this, kind of understanding the, maybe contrarian criticism being that, the economies of scale that you get from larger reactors was the way that, these projects penciled out in the period when they were being built. And that, even some of the different SMR designs that I've seen have grown as they've inched closer to commercialization. So I'll start with you, John, since you guys have both the AP1000 and the AP300 here to speak
No,
to.
sure. No, I talked to some of the folks at Westinghouse that have been at the company longer than I have, just to get a little more of the historical perspective. But I think that idea has been around for a while. I mean, I can't pinpoint a specific date, but at least a decade or more, right? I mean, we had AP600 effort for a while, right? Which the market just, wasn't a favorable reaction from the market. So that was kind of put on hold. And I think, also what happened from our perspective, it's the economics and the LCOE. It's still, very difficult to beat the large scale reactors when it comes to LCOE and things like that. So, but we do recognize that there's different market segments and there's different regions with different requirements. You have the traditional, nuclear locations, right, which are, moving more towards the larger scale, but new location, new states, new industries, right, are going to require smaller sizes. So that's, we have the AP300 in development, right? So that is, again, derived from the AP1000. We didn't want to, de-risk. We wanted to try to de-risk it as much as possible, but we recognize that that is a different segment that's going to require a different solution, which is why we introduced that. Da Vinci microreactors, again, as I mentioned earlier, that's a completely different market segment, right? That we want to definitely, go after in a little different way. But that's kind of how things tied in our past.
So I'll ask the same question of you, Jeff. I'm curious to hear you kind of respond to that. If you agree that these technologies serve different market segments, and also I'll add to that, especially for the two of you. I'll come to you after, Florent. Whether you see Gen 4 technology as better suited to some of these smaller sizes or to meeting these different market segments than say a Gen 3 plus that is of equivalent size.
Okay, yeah, great. All right, compound question. Let me think back to where the first one is. So I do agree there are different markets. While not being a historian, I'll do my best to just give a couple key points on how I think we got to the decision. And then having an economic degree in undergrad, I'll talk to economies of scale or how we might look at other economic drivers. So let's with regard to different markets, we've actually, let me go back. Let's look through the history. So the U.S. Navy pioneered small pressurized water reactors for submarines and aircraft carriers, designing in sequence and repetition. And so this has been done at an SMR scale. So that's good to see. Proof points are important. And then let's fast forward to more recent history. We've seen mega projects with the AP1000. And all of us in the room, I think if we're on the same page for seeing an advancement of nuclear, benefited from the accomplishments of those Vogtle 3 and 4 coming online. Huge, huge wins for the industry. Now, they're at a different scale, over a gigawatt compared to what Kairos is pursuing. And so that sets up different economic opportunities and challenges and different markets as well. So when we're looking at a market, what do we see, especially well suited for the SMR 150 megawatt module type market? There are markets where you may not, where our customers may not be looking to scale at gigawatt increments, right? So there's a situation right there. There's also, when I originally began working with Google and others in the data center before we signed our agreement with Google, I had some concerns, right? Data centers went from, wow, 100 megawatts is huge. Now we're talking about multi-gigawatt data centers. What are we going to do? The good news is there's a strong fit for that and other communities where critical power matters, right? There's a redundancy that you can get with SMRs, especially when there's a commercial off-taker who's looking for that power and the robustness that can come with that. And then also there's the industrial heat market as well. There's propulsion. So there are different markets that can be served where we as an industry stand to complement each other very well. In terms of economics, you can't argue with the scale of an AP1000, right? But that also requires scale of capital, right? And so there are, this week I've heard a number of parties talking about their ambitions to deploy and plans coming together, the 10-pack, there's great initiatives happening. Not all customers and off-takers are in the position to take that scale project on. And then there's a different approach. I shared with you the iterations that Kairos is going through and the vertical integration we're doing. I don't know that we'd be able to do. So when you think about when it crystallized for us, we have this iterative development strategy that is working for us now. I don't know that that's possible to pull off at the scale of a gigawatt plus modular-based system, right? So what we can do with an SMR, that's more of the scale where we can iterate, learn from, and then incorporate those lessons in fast iteration leading up to our first reactor, and then start to standardize early. And there is the economy of scale driver, and there's also the learning curve driver. And so, you kind of have to pick your strategy, execute discipline against that, and take that approach. And that's what we're doing. And so that's how we got there. I I can speak more to Gen 3 and Gen 4, but we can also move on and hear some other perspectives and come back to that if you'd
Well,
like.
I think we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, so that's a very loaded question. So I think, the acknowledgement that the market has changed. If you look at, grid power, it's price sensitive. So you need to understand the price sensitivity of the markets. So grid scale is highly price sensitive because there are other sources. It's difficult to compete with the cost of. Now, if you know that if you look at the emerging markets, data centers, remote community, et cetera, they have reduced price sensitivity because they do value some of the other attributes, which is one of them is obviously clean energy, but also just dispatchability, flexibility, and we're looking a lot at, for the data center off the grid. It's not just, the source of energy, it's also the ability to deliver the electricity where it's needed. So this is why, the Google, Meta and all those guys are very keen to say, okay, we don't want to invest into a national grid. We want, a solution for our application. So there's that. Now, I'll cover briefly Gen 3, Gen 4 perspective. 30 years ago, going back to the example, when Eisenhower developed, the submarines and nuclear power, there were two options, in fact, implemented in submarines. One was PWR, one was sodium-cooled fast reactor. So Gen 4 existed at the onset of nuclear, really. So Gen 4 saying it's a new thing, well, it was a new thing 60 years ago. But the difference, it was not as well understood. It's different medium, different material, and it's safer and simpler because of the reliance on physics. Physics was not as well understood 60 years ago, so over the last 3 decades, there was significant improvement on understanding the physics, and we've seen even NRC has opened the door to acknowledging what we call passive safety feedback as a means of shutdown. So it was not possible 20 years ago. We could not have licensed that way. Now we can. And so because of that, we can deploy the small units next to application, and we have EPZ, emergency planning zone, of 0, that site limited. So this makes it a lot more acceptable for remote communities. This community don't want to have to deal with becoming nuclear experts. They want clean power. So this is, I think, for me, the key shift of Gen 3 to Gen 4. Gen 4 is simple, better understood, and now, there's a pathway for deployment. So I think this is what created the opportunity. I think the same value was there 30 years ago, but we were not ready to really appreciate it and value it. I think we are now today.
Thank you. So, one of the exciting trends I think we've seen in the past few months are all of these different deals looking to use artificial intelligence software to improve the construction or the supply chains around nuclear. There's the Palantir nuclear company deal. I believe you guys are working with Google, yes, and I know Atomic Canyon has been working with Diablo Canyon and now with INL to establish some milestones and benchmarks for the use of large language models in this. And so I'm wondering, what realistically, how big of a role do you expect this kind of technology to play in changing what your construction looks like? And is there a concrete example of how it's been used so far or how you expect it to be used that you can cite? And I'll start with you, John.
Yeah, no, good question. Yeah, a lot of good collaboration there. We are big adopters of AI, not only with Google, but internally. We have a system called Bertha that we took all of our internal documents and, get the system to learn and help us, right, on all fronts, right, whether it's updating drawings, learning from field experience and the like. So that is actively used, a lot of proprietary information that we have in-house. And then just 2 months ago, right, we signed a great collaboration with Google that is taking that a step further and, using their services. And really that's aimed at construction. That is certainly, the big deal there is to how do we get smarter about construction, ourselves with our constructor partners, right? That's a big deal. So we need to get smarter, we need to get more efficient, and that's what that's targeted for. It's still early, to quantify exactly, what that's going to pay off, but I think the goal is here to shave a year off the construction cycle. So we're very optimistic about what that can deliver. We're big adopters and, plan to use it more and more in the business.
Yeah. We're in early days, and we're still learning what AI can do. For Kairos, when we're going through our iterations, we're accumulating a massive operational experience database of data from the physical world as we go through and we build these components, putting them in the digital world and building libraries that we can learn from. Areas where we see opportunity to complement and optimize what our human engineers are doing, we can optimize design through digital twins. AI can run thousands of configurations in minutes or seconds, reducing workload. Quality control and inspection, AI-enabled imaging can look at welds. We talked about the importance of welds, and when it comes to reactors, it's a different level than a standard weld. Safety monitoring, running real-time monitoring and recognition. And there's also been a fair amount of work done and being done on the regulatory space, both in terms of preparing applications. Those are such text-heavy documents, and they can take a lot of time for human processes to run. Also, I hope the NRC, in reviewing those applications, the last thing we want to do is jam the pipeline full of many, many more applications and not have a review process. And it sounds like there may be some work being done in that space as well. So I think there are a number of touch points across the industry where the very customers we're serving can also serve us as we seek to advance our own industry.
Yeah. So we're slightly earlier in the process of Westinghouse and Kairos. We've had a very good discussion with various entities, actually with Palantir, in New York City, and with Altair. The state of their solution is not to the level where you can really start seeing a benefit from it. I think that's still, AI to be developed for the application we have. So really, it depends on the application you're looking for. So trying to bucket it in a simple way, you could use AI from the design perspective. So the AI can understand all the in and outs and run simulation. Now, when you do nuclear design, I'll be honest, even just not doing full multi-physics, some of the calculation can take 3 or 5 months to run. So we have to be careful, designing a nuclear reactor. There are many types of physics. So yeah, the compute power can be ridiculous. Now, you have the operation part of things. I think, this is a very interesting one because AI can really be used to manage a grid, the different source of power, the predictability value of where the power is being used and how it's being generated. And the last part of that is also on the construction. So I'll just give you the perspective of micro reactors, where Westinghouse, we may have to build one AP1000. We'll have to build 30 of them to match the same power. So we'll have 30 times more of each part. And the traceability of the different manufacturers and providers is going to be key of keeping things on schedule. So to understand, somebody had a strike in that part of the world on their workers, so that's going to be delayed. Your quality workers, they are being out sick or something. So it's really helping to translate an incredible amount of data into something that you can look at and say, okay, that's going to be the bottleneck, so I need to focus on that. So it's not yet implemented in that way, but I think this is where we're moving towards on leveraging it that way.
So there are myriad different kind of government de-risking strategies I could ask about, but one that has really fascinated me is just the role that government-owned utilities are playing in actually helping to establish, the first-of-a-kind reactors here. Obviously, we have the OPG deal for GE Hitachi in Ontario, and TVA kind of following up on that in the US. Now we have the TVA deal with Kairos, and of course now there's NIPA, stepping in, which seems to solve the tricky problem of how do you build a new nuclear power plant in a state with a deregulated electricity market. And so I'm curious, and I'll start with you, Jeff. Given your recent news with the TVA. Whether you see this as an essential tool to deploying some of these new technologies. Obviously, government-owned entities and utilities elsewhere in the nuclear industry around the world are really lead the way, and whether you see maybe there's a different pathway whereby a first-of-a-kind technology could actually come to fruition through a deal with a private or investor-owned utility.
Yeah. So it's been a great process, not an easy process, but a very good and productive process working with both TVA and Google to announce our first PPA with the utility, that being TVA. But that and that is it's not only a government-owned utility, it's also a public-private partnership, and the private aspect of that is key, both in what Kairos and Google are bringing to the table, and it worked well to be able to do that with TVA. I think that I had a very interesting dinner conversation last night, and there's a question both on the micro level in terms of what we each need as companies, and then the macro level, what the United States may want to accomplish as an industry, and then ultimately if we think about exports, right, and how do we compete globally? And there were some interesting different perspectives in the room on where government comes in. I think it's important to look at government on at least three levels, right? There's the federal level and what can happen at the federal scale, like for example with the ARDP program, to help to enable first-of-a-kind reactors and help to de-risk and limit some of the risk that financiers would face with first or early-of-a-kind reactors. At the state level, I think there can be economic incentives. There can also be, we're a country where states set a lot of policy for what happens within their boundaries and their borders. I think making sure that nuclear is a part of those incentive programs and those portfolio targets, because that's not always been the case. That's important. Also, investing at the state and local level in labor force. This is we're building here. We're building in America. We need states and regions that have the ability to educate workers and that next generation of labor force with this new form of energy. So I think that's an area where state can come in as well. And we're doing programs like that with TVA, with universities in the region. And then last, the local level also matters because these plants are being built at the local level. So having local support in addition to the federal and state that we all often look at. Oak Ridge has been a great case for local support. TVA has been a part of that. Oak Ridge has also been a part of that. So you've got government labs coming in. And so I think there are a lot of different angles that we have to look at it, but I think making sure that we don't forget to look at it at all three levels as we go through each of our strategies as we seek to deploy.
Very fair. John, I'm curious to get your position.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the government's been extremely helpful and supportive, as we heard earlier this morning. You can't underestimate, I mean, of course, the tax credits and how that was treated. It's tremendous. The Loan Program Office has been extremely supportive of evaluating, these large applications and really supporting them, low interest rate loans and things like that. So that's, cannot be underestimated. I look at what DOE has done, on the SMR front with some of the recent FOAs, right? And really putting substantial money to get more technology out there. So I think the federal government has been tremendously supportive. At the state level, I think, it varies, of course, but I think starting small, trying to break these projects down, right? I think especially in some states, right, where how do you get started on these big projects, right? Is it a siting study, a feed study, helping qualify sites? I've seen different states take action to help with those first steps, right? It's a long journey, right? And how do you start to de-risk those projects? So Nebraska is one example, right, where they're doing a statewide siting study, right? And early days, but those kinds of initial steps help us all, right, to get the right sites, the right projects with the right support. So those are some at the top of mind.
Florent, do you think would Nano prefer to have a state-run partner in the first deployment, or can
we'd love for the state to pay for it. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Tell me, where do I sign? No, but this is, you have to understand. We actually, it's a pretty nice panel because we present the different conundrum and challenges. Like for us, smaller reactor, we have 2 deployment projects, one in the US, one in Canada. Our execs have done very good for funding the company to be able to execute on those on our own. So this is not just a money issue. This is also providing the support where it's needed. There are many ways that through the deployment of a nuclear project, it can go wrong. It's not just lack of money. One big one is going to be public acceptance, especially for us, and the siting. I think you just touched on it, John. It's really because for us, where others may need one site, and that's one big reactor, we may need 10 or 20 different sites, much smaller sites. but there needs to be more communication that can be supported by the government, by the state, on really helping to understand what those technologies are. We're talking Gen 4. Everybody's like, oh, it's new, it's never been done. This was my point. I'm informing you it's been done 60 years ago. So this is the misunderstanding, and there's a lot of education, there's a lot of value, there's a lot of support that's needed at the community level. The town, the township where you're going to get your site, that you need that support. We are small companies. I mean, Westinghouse is obviously much bigger, but we currently don't have the bandwidth to really do all this advocacy. So people in the room need to also help on transferring, transferring right information that is of relevance to the public. I'll just spend one more minute in Canada, because in Canada it's even more challenging. Where we're deploying, you have to deal with the First Nations. They have a say. This is historically their land, and they are historically against nuclear. So there's a lot of discussion that need to take place before you can really roll out those things. But they also have a deep understanding that they need clean energy, because currently those remote communities are really running on diesel generators. So it costs them a fortune, and the emissions are terrible. So this is why we need to really start having this message more widely open. Obviously, it benefits us, but it benefits the community overall. So that's where I think the government and the state and the local community can really help of spreading the message.
So I have more questions, but I also have enough humility to know that many of you probably have better ones. So we have a few minutes for audience Q&A. I'll just urge you to ask a question, and they'll be around after if you want to just make a statement or have a conversation. But I'll start here in the front.
Hi, my name is Lauren Kraft. I'm a reporter with Energy Intelligence. Thank you all so much. I had a follow-up question. You asked about AI, and we've heard a lot at Climate Week how AI can be a force for good. I've heard a lot that I'm going to get to a question. I've heard a lot that AI can be used for modeling of advanced technologies, including in the nuclear field, whether that's advanced Gen 4 technology, whether that's SMRs. I was wondering if you have any examples of that. How does that work, and how does that deliver benefits?
Thank you. Whichever of you would like to start first.
Yeah. I'll start with it. So, what I was saying on that question, you need to understand the timeline. So AI is not prime and ripe for doing the design work for you. You have to appreciate that the deep understanding of some of the physical phenomena is only dated from 10 years ago. Some of those phenomena are still not yet fully understood. Kairos with molten salt can probably speak extensively about the molten salt chemistry, etc. So relying on AI is only as good as the model you feed it. So do we have the model? And that's so for us. We're trying to move fast with commercial off-the-shelf technology, so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. So right now, we are moving forward without AI in our design phase, but for the next iteration of it, we'd love to leverage it. Again, when you're doing design of a reactor, we're talking terabytes of data. No one person can really appreciate all of that, and finding the optimum point in that would be perfectly done by AI. So there's just currently not a system that's set up in that way. This is why we're talking with some of those providers of AI solution to say, well, this is what we could see as a value, but like I was saying, they are not ready for it at that time, at least not the one we talk to. I don't want to generalize for everybody.
I want to make time for more questions. So the gentleman there.
Hi, I'm Sean Captain, another one of those obnoxious reporters. And no, she's not obnoxious at all. Sorry about it.
I'll be the obnoxious reporter.
I have a really naive question I'd like to ask. Why not? So there's a history of small modular reactors produced by the Navy going back decades and decades. And there's an urgent need for power like immediately. Is there any thought about just kicking out a bunch of those, at least for as an interim thing, until these multi-year or multi-decade new designs are being developed?
I'll just give a short answer on that one. They use HEU, highly enriched uranium, 93% enriched. It's weapon grade material, so that's not going to work for commercial deployments. But
No, that's a good answer. So,
All right. Gentleman here in the front.
Hi, I'm Bryce Chenault with the Abundance Institute. Would love to help all of you guys deploy all across the country if I can. But I had a question for you guys brought up state policy. Is there a state that sticks out to you that's doing it best? I mean, maybe not from like a giving you all the money in the world, but from like a permitting process and that type of thing? Is there a state that sticks out to you in that regard? And then two, I'd love to hear your thoughts on if you're familiar with it, there's the Last Energy, the state of Texas, the state of Utah did a lawsuit with the NRC challenging their regulatory authority over SMRs. And if you had a reaction to that, optimistic about it for your industry or otherwise?
I can comment on your first question. I mean, the states that stick out to me, Virginia was very active and introduced legislation to get cost recovery on, initial SMR projects, and that really stimulated the market, and that was maybe 18 months ago. So I think they were one of the leaders there. Texas has passed legislation, right, to again, contribute to those early project development costs. So that I think is off to a good start. Nebraska, as I mentioned, is smaller effort, but nonetheless a very important effort for getting the right sites ready. I am sure there are more that will come to mind, but those are a couple examples.
Did you do that to leave the NRC question for somebody else?
Well, yeah.
That's good. That's good. So with regard to the NRC, I'll do the best I can to answer that, given the experience that Kairos has already had with the NRC. The first construction permit, so we're doing the two-part, there's the combined license or the two-part. I'm not the expert to take you down that path, but at a high level. So we've taken the two-part, as many do, with the first early of a kind reactors. And that for us, that process went well under the current structure of the NRC. Now, we invested in that process by doing a dozen topical reports going in to help to inform the NRC of the direction we were taking. That's the simplified definition of what that is. And then we went through the process, and the NRC delivered on time and on budget for that. It wasn't easy. It's an incredibly intentional process. And then for the second and third construction permits that Kairos Power received, those came in about 2/3 the amount of time. So we found the process to be workable for SMRs as is. However, how it scales, we haven't seen that yet. I can't judge that because we haven't seen it. And there's a lot of ambition to make the process, to ensure that the process is streamlined going forward. I hope that is done in a thoughtful way. And what's worked continues to work. But through change, we don't know what happens until it happens. So appreciate the intent, because we do need to be able to continue to get through the NRC efficiently or even incrementally more, especially when more reactor technologies are going to start to fill that pipe, right? Or more of the same. So we'll have to see how that plays out. I just hope the pieces at work are allowed to continue to work, so we have a good we've got a process that other countries can look to when we seek to export, and we know how it works, because it'll be complicated no matter what it is.
Great. We've got time for maybe one more question. I'll get from over here, the woman in the green. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had the mic.
Barry Butler with the Lynchburg Regional Business Alliance. And John, thank you for mentioning Virginia. So we've definitely been working very hard to align with the nuclear energy industry, and especially legislatively. My question is on workforce. I think you touched on it a couple different places, but at a local level, at a regional level, what do you see as the best way to align workforce needs with the nuclear energy industry, especially when it comes to career technical education and other STEM type fields?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and that's something I think we're all working on. I think getting to universities and even the high schools, right, to make sure and raise awareness, right, and also let people know, hey, there's a career path here, right, and there's a pipeline of projects that you can be part of, right. So I think it's part of it is getting to lower levels, trying to be more specific on the details of what's coming and what's needed, and I think that's an area too that I think there's a little more collaboration needed across states, right, to define that, right? It's often talked about at the higher levels, and we have a couple initiatives ongoing. It's early, but it's very important. So there's definitely more work to be done.
If I may just add quickly to it, I think we need to shift from everybody want to do reactor design to actually on the construction and the fabrication. So this is what worries me more than having more designers. So I think a lot of the nuclear program in the US are great, but we also need to kind of make fabrication and manufacturing more sexy to some extent.
All right, so we'll squeeze in one more, the woman in the yellow shirt.
Thanks. Hi, Elizabeth Halliday, Grace Richardson Fund. My questions concern global competitiveness with China. Could you please speak about standardization? Because we certainly want U.S. companies to be the company of record. And then if each of you could touch on strategy for reaching out to the rest of the world.
Perfect.
Well, I would say standardization it's a big deal, right? And you can never underestimate how important it is that, all the reactors, AP1000 reactors in China, in Vogtle, it's the same core components, right? Their construction approach is different, right? And that they have an advantage there because they can mobilize many people to work on projects and move them around as needed. So, but the product standardization is there, right? And globally, I mean, we have we have a global footprint. We're very active in Europe and China, as I mentioned, all across Scandinavia, the UK. So this is happening everywhere. So so we're a big part of it. We have a luxury of being an older, more experienced company and with a global footprint. But it's a big market that's developing everywhere.
Yeah, standardization key. Kairos Power is singularly focused on our KPFHR reactor. And we recently announced we are increasing the scale of our first grid-tied reactor to be at commercial scale. So we're not removing the iteration, but we're stepping into standardization one step earlier, right? That iteration is a value. With regard to international deployment, absolutely see market potential there and appreciate what's happening on the international market and what others are doing. For us, with our strategy, it's important to us to make sure that we get it right within the United States first, because that's where we are, and we can best control that process so that when we go out and take on new variables, we know what we're bringing out there, right? So longer term, we see strong value. We want to make sure we're ready to go when we go.
Yeah, and quickly adding on it, that's very similar to Jeff. You need to acknowledge that we have standard in the US, ASME, NRC, that are world standard. A lot of those new emerging countries who are interested in nuclear, they don't have the equivalent. So if we can demonstrate we can do it in the US and it works, then when you go to those countries, you can use the American standard and push for those to be acknowledged. Same thing working in Canada, CNSC and NRC used to be working closely together. CNSC is willing to accept the ASME, which is the American standard. So this is why, but we need to show that we can do it in our country before we can claim other countries should do it our ways.
Great. Well, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for your attention, and please join me in applause for the